We know Scott Frost can definitely recruit, but how is he doing it holding on to the ones he's already got?
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in to Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every single day. Joining me as he does every week, multiple times a week, is my good friend Andrew Gluco, coverer of all things UCF sports. Andrew, it feels like just yesterday you and I started doing UCF podcast together, and here we are 9 months later. Here we are 9 months later, talking UCF football like no other. On today's show, I want to talk about roster management, where UCF may be a little overloaded at certain positions, and then about the solution to all your roster management issues. Let's start at the top with roster management. A lot of coaches are facing the new reality, Andrew, that you not only have to go out and recruit well from high school, but you have the added layer of having to sit down with all your guys at the end of the season and say, please don't leave. Don't go. If you didn't get as much playing time as you wanted last year, stick with me another year. If you want more money, here it is. I mean, it has added another level of stress for coaches in the offseason saying, hey, I don't really have to go out and find new guys. I got to hold on to the guys I have, bring in new guys, not make my current guys feel like the new guys are going to take their spot, and everybody wants more money.
Well, I mean, that's the truth. Spaceballs 2, the search for more money or something like that. I may have butchered that slightly, but I got Spaceballs 2 in the mind because the movie is coming. It's coming. But I mean, here's the thing. We look at Ohio State last year. They spent $20 million on a roster. You know what almost all that was? Retaining their current talent. It's going to be a challenge. One of the benefits that UCF has that a lot of schools don't is they have already been working with a smaller budget compared to their other Power 4 contemporaries. And as a result, the adjustment to add money to this fund, this $20 million, granted, as we know, it's really closer to 18 because they have to fund all these other scholarships because it's no longer about, it's the roster limit is now your scholarship limit, and it's kind of changed and now correlate. There are 5 players that UCF has that go over that line. The designated student athletes is the title they'll have, and as we found out just recently, a new one-time transfer portal is going to open for those DSAs, and we talked about those designated student athletes beforehand. They're the ones that the walk-ons, the ones that don't fall within this, the new NIL plan as a result of the House settlement. They're not part, they're kind of outside of that, but because of the settlement, they're grandfathered to be able to work their way down in their eligibility. But they do have a chance to transfer for, again, outside of the normal windows because of these changes. Part of that is, Scott Frost going to have to convince these 5 players, hey, stick around, let's make some magic happen. I know you're not getting, buku bucks because you're not on scholarship, but stick around. And that's one challenge right there. Granted, it's a one-time transfer window, and those DSAs are going to it's basically a runoff mode. It's so that these players who were on the roster when the roster was larger are not going to be adversely affected. UCF has 110 players on the team, and the scholarship limit's 105. Do the math. So you have to manage that. Then you go to the next level down, which is going to be, okay, you've got the guys that you have. You're going to play the season out, and you're going to get towards, that December signing day. Now you got to start working on keeping players happy, and money is part of it. Playing time is part of it. Every player has a different motivation, why they chose UCF or what keeps them there. some aren't about the money, but money makes it a lot easier. So UCF's going to have to, and this goes up to Terry Mohajir level, is going to have to decide how they're going to budget that, approximately 18 million available between the different sports in funding to keep these players on their roster. Because sure, technically you could spend it all on football, but let's be real, that's a terrible idea because you're basically sacrificing every other sport for it. So they're gonna have to do some budgeting, and a lot of fans, and I'm not specifically saying one fan, one team or not, just fans in general, don't fully understand how this kind of changes the game. If you can put in enough money to fill those coffers, it really levels out the playing field a lot, because any outside NIL deal beyond these funds, if it's $600 or more, it's got to go through a clearinghouse.
Yep.
So from a school standpoint, the playing field is being level. It's the outside stuff's still out there, but now it has to stand scrutiny. That this pay for play stuff that has been like polluting college sports, while they're going to keep finding ways to try to find loopholes to keep this alive, they're on the attack against it. And if they ever get any congressional help, which they've been lobbying for, oh boy, that changes everything. But again, it's eventually come down to UCF decide how much do we want to budget, and then going up there against their contemporaries, and hey, you want to be a part of history or do you want to write the history? And we'll write you a nice check in the process.
Andrew, as we've moved through recruiting interviews, we sat down with Kane Archer. Obviously, you saw Dante Carr this week talk to UCF fans. What we've heard is the money has not been a huge factor, if a factor at all, for UCF recruits that are committing right now. I think that they have the right mindset. It's more of a, if I handle my business on the football field, the money will take care of itself. But that's not going to continue to be the case as you move up in recruiting, right? Like, because for the higher level recruits, the money is just a part of the conversation. It may not, it's almost like it's not the main thing. It's just part of it, right? Because the schools you're competing against are going to have some money on the table. You just need to be able to offer enough money to bring the conversation back to football, right? Like, if you're looking for, this is not a number in relation to anything specifically. I'm just saying, if you're looking for $250K, here's $250K. Now let's talk about how we're going to develop you as a football player, right? That's where coaches want the conversation to be.
The key is get them on campus. That's always the key. It's like a job interview. If you can get in the door and get the interview, you can win the job. If they just look at your resume, no thanks because it wasn't well written or whatever, obviously you've lost. So the key is get the player onto campus and you can win them over. Is it dollar related? Every player is different. And, you want a certain skill set. In the case of UCF, you have a very modern campus that has its own flavor. It's kind of a city within a city, very, very, closed in on itself, in East Orange County, just outside of Seminole County. It's a growing area population wise, but it's not like, say, a University of Florida or Ohio State in the fact that it's an older school that's kind of in the middle of the city, and there's stuff that you have to cross major roads and all this other stuff. So it's a different style. It's a much more modern style campus, and every player is looking for something different. So if you can bring them on to campus, you can find out what makes them tick. What are they looking for, and kind of lean towards that. Are they looking for something new? These are young kids. Maybe they don't want to like old buildings that might only have partial central air, or maybe they're interested in more modern stuff. Okay, well, lean into that. But the key is get them to campus, and because UCF is going to be able to compete for the most part on that salary cap level, at least having the money, in the coffers, they can at least bring them in there. Like, hey, we can at least let's try, give us a shot. We can be competitive. And, I think with the Big 12 still trying to figure itself out, I think gives UCF an opportunity. It's not like, some of the other established, like Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. Those are your big three in the SEC. And you have, Alabama, LSU, in the, Georgia in the SEC. And then you have Florida State, Clemson in the ACC. Who's in the Big 12? Who is the power guy in the Big 12? There is none. They're all still jockeying for position of becoming that alpha dog. And that gives UCF a fighting chance. I mean, like, hey, come check us out. We're in the fight just like anyone else. This conference is still looking for its heavyweight, and we want your help to make us the big dog. And that feeds to the player's competitive edge. If you're not a competitor, you're playing the wrong sport. You shouldn't be in sports.
Yeah.
You should have that natural competitive fire in you. That's where the coaches come into play, where you give that motivating rah-rah speech and get them fired up so they can run through a brick wall. The administration gives the coaching staff the support that they need. Doesn't matter if it's football, baseball, basketball, whatever, women's, men's sports, doesn't matter. They all go back to the same wiring of competitive spirit. So, the money is part of it and it helps, but that helps bring them to campus. The fact that they can be competitive there, but there's the other aspects of what drives these players. And I think as long as they get to campus, they can be sold.
Yeah, I agree with you. Look, they got humidity in Orlando, but there's also enough NIL money to make sure you have central air to survive the humidity, the Florida humidity. Look, it's a fascinating conversation about roster management. Every coach has their specific challenges as it pertains to it. As you mentioned, I think in some of the other conferences where they have a more clear-cut top of the conference, there are a couple teams that are clearly in the upper echelon of the conference. As in contrast that with the Big 12, where it's wide open, it feels like, and there are so many players. We just did our Locked On preseason Big 12 poll, and I may flash that here in our second segment, but I'm telling you, there are so many teams that could win this conference. If you're Scott Frost and you can figure out this roster management piece, it may give you an edge over some of those peers that you're neck and neck with here in your first and second year coaching back in the Big 12. But look, we're going to have a quick word from our sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to talk about more specifically about certain positions as it comes to roster management. Guys, this is Locked On UCF. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Guys, you know the deal. You ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can be. Whether you're growing your savings or planning for a big purchase, Monarch Money puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And let me tell you something. I mentioned that Florida humidity. If the AC goes out, you're going to wish you saved some for a rainy day. Monarch Money can help you with that. Get your HVAC guy out there to take care of you here in the summer heat. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Get to monarchmoney.com and get the saving. I mentioned our Big 12 preseason rankings at Locked On. Before we get into it, I do want to show this. They dropped this in here for me, so a little bit of a surprise tidbit on today's show. It wasn't on the agenda, but we're going to ad-lib this a little bit. Here is our preseason poll. The defending Big 12 champs, the Sun Devils, come in at number 1. Kansas State comes in at number 2. Texas Tech at 3. Baylor at 4. This is an interesting one to me. I wanted to talk to you about the Cyclones at 5. You've got BYU at 6. Now, some interesting developments there with their quarterback situation that we'll discuss here briefly. You got TCU at 7, the Utah Utes at 8, the Kansas Jayhawks at 9, the Colorado Buffs at 10. Deion squad down at 10. They've got a lot of really big-time turnover there on that program. You've got the Houston Cougs at 11. At 12, Oklahoma State. 13, West Virginia. 14, Cincinnati. 15, UCF. Is UCF the 15th best team in the conference? And at number 16, you've got the Arizona Wildcats. Bear down. Before we get into our second topic, your thoughts really quickly on our Locked On preseason Big 12 poll and UCF coming in at 15.
I mean, I can't really argue UCF at 15. Part of the problem is they have so many question marks.
Yeah.
And nobody knows what this team is. They don't have there's no establishment at quarterback. There's no really you look at it and Cam Fancher is your best statistical quarterback. I mean, there's not really much to fall back on here. Your wide receivers are basically completely turned over. Half your most of your offensive line are a bunch of transfers. As a result, this team is so chock full of unknowns because, similar to West Virginia, they basically took and overhauled the entire roster. It's a result. I mean, it's such a question mark. It's like, well, it's a safe bet to bet low. I mean, it just shows how bad Arizona is that they're even lower. But I mean,
a terrible place, by the way.
You're not speaking from experience or anything, are you?
I lived there for a year. I tell you, I'm not a big Tucson fan. There's two demographics there: college students and retired people, and there's no one in between. Like, it's just you're either in college or you are one geriatric incident away from.
I mean, so where I live, it's the same without the college students.
There you go. Fair enough.
Yeah. They say we're in heaven's waiting room, and their parents live a little bit further south from here.
Heaven's waiting room.
So I mean, it's no better. It's no better. But to get back on track here before we completely go off the rails, looking at the other side, I think they made some safe moves with Arizona State. Sam Leavitt, did a great job as quarterback last year, but replacing Cam Skattebo, he was the heart and soul of that team, and replacing him is no easy undertaking. So I think it might be a little bit of a stretch to have them number one. I understand why, because it's easy to fall back on your champion when it feels like there's no clear-cut top level team. And you talked about BYU. We know BYU is a team in flux. Looks like Jake Retzlaff is leaving the program in light of everything that went on with his legal troubles, and then the school saying, well, you admitted to breaking our rules anyway, we're going to suspend you. And he's going to be like, nope, and leave. So at that point, if he's gone and that cannot be fixed, which I don't think BYU is going to budge on that. We've already seen when they were doing conference expansion the last time, when BYU was in 2016, when schools like BYU and UCF did the dog and pony show for the Big 12 before they opted to do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that was talked about was BYU playing on Sunday and how it was a non-starter. And back then, the Big 12 was not interested in working around that. This current regime had no problem working around that, which it should have been a non-issue to begin with, not on BYU side, but the Big 12 side. They should have just worked around it. It's not difficult to say, okay, BYU doesn't play on Sundays, period. We can make it work. But, because they have very strict rules, and that can rub a lot of people the wrong way. They're very restrictive, but, it's a private school, their choice. You choose to go there. If he broke the rules, I can't, I don't agree, but the rules are the rules. And he's free to go at that point. But I don't know, man. I can't put BYU at 6 at this point. They're a major question mark. I'd have them probably below Colorado at this point, even though Colorado, may be a little overrated with their all the attrition that they've suffered with their best players all leaving. I don't know. So it's just the I would have put Texas Tech as number one. I think they invested in a winning program this year.
Yeah.
I think Joey McGuire has all the pieces in place compared to some of these other schools to make a run. Kansas State at 2, I think, is a good place to have them. I would have moved Arizona State down. Baylor, I think, is a little overrated. They surprised some, but I don't feel like they've figured it all out. Utah, man, Utah's a shell of itself. Obviously, Cam Rising no longer there, finally moved on. But putting him in the middle, I don't know, man. Again, I can, Houston hasn't accomplished a whole lot. They invested a lot in this offseason, and then the recruiting's picking up, but I don't know if that's going to transition into 2025 success. You're going to have a lot of bottom level teams fighting for like the basement here.
Yeah, here's the point I want to make about this, right? Is that while I get UCF at the bottom, I don't think there's a lot of separation between like 8 and 15. Yeah, with a lot of these teams, West Virginia coming in at 13, they've got a ton of things there. I mean, they may be physically ranked over UCF, but I'm not sure that these teams are that much better than UCF, especially when you look at how some of these games turned out. We have head-to-heads to look at in a lot of this to say, hey, a 4-8 UCF team nearly beat the Big 12 champs last year. As a matter of fact, a lot of people think, myself included, they should have won that game. UCF.
They totally should have won that game. They choked that game. They should have beat Iowa State. They choked that game. They came back and beat TCU in dramatic fashion. It showed what this team was capable of. They just couldn't put it together.
Yeah.
It's no different than like when Baylor came back from 1,000 points down against UCF in 2023 and won. Things happen in these games, but it's going to sound mean, but I think putting Arizona State at number 1 is a bit lazy.
Yeah, I honestly, I have to agree with you. Kenny Dillingham came out after the season and said, look, if you want to see more of this, we ain't money, because he understands where his talent level is if he wants to consistently compete for conference championships. You caught lightning in a bottle with Cam Scatterboo and Sam Levitt, but you've got to be able to reload to repeat. And, that's where we talk about, position overload here in our second segment, right? If you're Scott Frost, you cannot, because this is what I'm hearing from coaches. They're saying, hey, I can't go out and recruit wide receiver the way I normally would, because we spend all this money keeping the guys that we have here, and I don't want them to leave, and I want them to know that I'm invested, and it's throwing off our recruiting cycle. You can't be worried about any of that. You just have to go out and you got to get the best guys year in and year out. So if you're, somebody left a comment on one of our videos that said, it was on the Dante Carr interview, pretty much saying, well, so now Kane Archer is obviously going to leave. And it's like, no, why would he leave? Just because Dante Carr got here? No, we have to get used to the idea that there could be 2 good quarterbacks on this roster that are not afraid to compete with each other.
Yeah, coming in the door, that's one thing. Them competing and the loser leaves. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. That like, okay, I'm not going to be the guy. I'm going to look for another opportunity. Yeah. But I expect them, to come in and compete for you. Again, like I said before, the competitive nature of these players. It's how they're wired. If you're not competitive in wanting to be the man, if you just want to go somewhere where they're just going to hand it to you, stay in the FCS. Yeah. If you want to go like somewhere and you have to compete to win the job and prove that you belong, then you go to an FBS school, power conference school, and you deal with that competition. Yeah. I very much doubt Kane Archer is intimidated by Dante Carr or vice versa. I don't think either are intimidated by each other. In fact, I would wager, once this class is signed and everything, they get on campus, they're going to push each other. Iron shapes iron. And so one's going to do well, the other's going to push to get better and try to overtake them, and then vice versa. And they're going to keep working to make each other better because they want to be the guy.
Well, let me
again.
Go ahead. let me interject this point because Dante Carr said this, and I thought that it showed that he had the right mindset that you want. One of the big things that made him choose UCF over others, in particular Rutgers, was honesty from the coaching staff about where his game is at. They didn't try to blow smoke up his butt. They didn't say, oh, we see, you're going to be our guy. And they said, no, look, you got holes in your game. And if you're willing to commit to us, we will help you close the holes in your game from a mechanical standpoint and from a mental standpoint. But we feel like the raw talent is there. You just need the guidance and you need the development, and we've got that. So if you're willing to come here and accept coaching, UCF is the place for you. If not, then it may not be the place for you. And that is the thing that put him over there. I love this kid. Are you kidding? If that's the pitch that got him, he bought into the honesty of, look, this is where you're at. I'm going to be honest with you. You're not quite there yet. And if you're being honest with yourself, you know that your game has a ways to go. So if you bring a guy like that in, he's not going to run from competition. He's
going to relish it.
Yeah, he's going to get in there. And yeah, I asked these guys about, essentially getting to, they can't wait to get to know each other. Kane Archer and Dante Carr, right?
Iron shapes iron, man.
Yeah, these are the types of kids that you want. And so no such thing as position overload when you're building a high-level program with high-level recruits. Because at the end of the day, if you want top 10 classes, you got to get used to high-level attrition. It happens at all the best programs. There are 5-stars that walk out of Alabama and Texas and Ohio State every single year because they didn't get their shot or they weren't going to get their shot in a loaded room. I will remind people, Joe Burrow was the 3rd quarterback on an Ohio State roster. And he said, I got to get out of Dodge. And he went to LSU, and that was one of the best decisions he ever made. But the guys he was in there with, it's hard to argue that, and we have the benefit of hindsight, but the guys he was in there with were studs. They were absolutely starting. They just did have a lot of talent. All those guys were Power 5 starters. So, I remember, do you remember the Georgia room a few years ago that had Justin Fields? I think it was Jacob Fromm or Jacob Eason and Fromm. And all those guys started at program. Fields was probably the best of the bunch. And he was
buried.
Yeah, right.
He was buried in the chart. And,
oh man! So this is fans just have to get used to this.
Yeah, and it's normal as a quarterback because I was actually watching the Brett Favre documentary today on I think it was on HBO Max, and it was either that or Netflix. I forget which one it was, but I was jumping between the two. I was watching the Brett, and basically they were talking about the quarterback position, and it's a hallowed position. One guy. So either you're the guy or you're not, because if you have a 2-quarterback system, it's because you have no quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Someone's got to be the guy, which means someone else isn't. And either you can suck it up and keep trying, or you give up and you look for another opportunity. So I expect these guys to come into camp, sign on, come next year, compete, go for that first year. And neither of them might start next year. It depends how everything shakes out. They're going to be true freshmen still learning the college game. That may hold over to the next year when, UCF works to retain them. And then they actually really go for the job. UCF's right now going to have at least 3 quarterbacks carry over if all things stay the same, with actually 4, because you got 2 years of Tayven Jackson and you got 4 seasons worth, including if you include this season of the transfer from Virginia Tech, who's from my wife's high school, so I have to like him. And then you have 2 incoming freshmen who potentially have 5 years of eligibility with the red shirt. So you could have already a full room and not even have to really overblow having to go through the portal in 2026, which means they can focus on other things, because ideally they don't want to have to use the portal to determine their class. This was Gus Malzahn's Achilles heel. He could not develop internally. He had to keep going back to the portal. Scott Frost wants to avoid that. Stage one, be honest, get these guys on campus, show them where he envisions them and what they need to work on, and make them want to be a part of this.
Well, whether it's roster management or too many guys at one position, there is one thing that always solves your problems at the college football level. We'll talk about that one thing next on Locked On UCF. Just win, baby. Just win. When you
Al Davis.
Winning, we are not talking about any of this. It's just win. If Scott Frost can go out and he can win the football games he's supposed to win, and then get one or two that nobody expects him to win, then I think that, all this talk about roster management, look, man, when you're winning, it's easier. When you're winning, it is easier to convince your backup to wait his turn sometimes when the guy in front of him is clearly playing better, is clearly going to be gone because he's playing that well. And you can see, you're in that same line of development. So, you're going to step in and kill it when you get your shot. But it is harder to convince a talented QB to sit behind a guy who is quarterbacking a losing team. And you feel like you could be helping make it a winning team if you were the quarterback. I'm telling you, if Scott Frost can just not underperform the floor, he's going to get all the time he needs to build this thing right. But the floor can't be 4 games. So while I get people voting UCF because of all the question marks down at 15, if you're at 15th out of 16 teams, that tells me that you expect UCF to be a sub 500 team. And I don't think they're going to be a sub 500 team. I think they're a 6-6 team, hopefully at worst. But competent coaching can definitely flip 2 games from last year that were losses into wins. And we talked about how close some of those were. And we were not talking about cupcakes. The defending Big 12 champs, man, they had them on the ropes. Now, mind you, Cam Scatterboo did not play in that game. But
just saying, I mean, it's small detail.
Yeah, right. He didn't play in that game. So I for argument's sake, I want to make sure that we're accurate there. But we talked about some of the changes happening at BYU, and there are other teams in the Big 12 with a lot of question marks. Colorado has a ton of them, if you ask me. How are you? You just don't replace Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter and then think you're just going to keep it pushing. And even with those guys, they struggled at times. So I really believe there's an opening here for Scott Frost to stake his claim to the middle of the Big 12, the middle of the pack, in year one, and say, with competent coaching, we're going to win more. We're going to win more games than we did last year. 4 is a really low bar to cross. And I'm not saying, oh, he's going to come in, he's going to win 8, 9 games in year one. But I think that it is reasonable and realistic to expect this staff to pull out 6 wins and possibly surprise us with a 7th, or beat somebody that, again, they just flat out game planned, Andrew. Can we see that again?
Yeah. So winning, there's 2 frames of mind here. Winning begets winning. You win some game, you have a winning season. Players want to stick around for that. Players want to come join that, and it creates a winning streak, for lack of a better term, where you start having wins in the recruiting trail. The other is winning masks issues. That's what happened in 2023, Gus Malzahn's first year in the Big 12. There were some underlying issues there, but the winning kind of masked it, and they were able to kind of avoid, having to address some of those elephants. 2024, all of them came to a head as the team just had no, killer spirit, no killer edge to be able to finish games. So, I mean, there's 2 frames of mind there. I like to think that winning begets winning.
Yeah.
And that, if, players, the difference between a player playing good and playing great is really not all that far. It's a mental thing. The same player can put together an outstanding game and they can lay an egg, and it all comes down to mental. So if you've got losses in your brain and you're got 5, 6, 7 losses and there's still 4 games left in the season and you've got nothing to play for, that can really create a cascading effect. And
absolutely.
Look at a school like Vanderbilt. They, prior to last year, they had a string of failures, for a long time, and 6-6 was like the Super Bowl for them. And it's because in this case, losing begets losing. They kept losing, and as a result, no one's like, I don't want to deal with that. Why can't Kent State get off the ground? Because they keep losing and no one wants to be a part of that. Why is, Rutgers, most people's, interpretation of a dumpster fire? Because they spent so many decades in the trash as such a bad program that, it's hard to shake away that reputation. Even though they've started getting better, it's still a hard, you still think of Rutgers, you don't take them seriously. It's Rutgers.
Right.
And that's from that reputation of losing that's built up over time. My hometown, the Cleveland Browns, no one takes them seriously, even when they were winning, because, well, it's the Cleveland Browns. They haven't been a good team since the 1980s. It's the same thing. It creates a cycle. So if they can, win the 6, 7, somehow maybe get 8 games out of this, it's going to light a fire. It's going to make recruits want to be a part of that and see that they're able to get to the next step. It's going to keep the talent around because, hey, we're doing something special. I want to be a part of that. And it's just going to create wins off the field through the recruiting and the portal and the areas where it matters. Area businesses are going to want to invest. Who wants to invest in a losing product? No. People want to invest in winning products. They want to invest in winning players. So it creates that cascading effect. So if they can get 6 wins, which I agree should be that's the benchmark. If you don't get 6 wins, it's a failure of a season. Get to your 6 wins, and you're going to see other victories follow that.
Yeah, when you have the type of talent in at least some of the resources that UCF has, and you don't get to 6 wins, it's coaching malpractice most of the time. As I mentioned, again, an incredible stat. I talked about it with Dante Carr. You went to your 4th string quarterback last year, and nobody got hurt, not because of injury. That is an insane thing to happen on any college roster, and UCF did that. And again, the guy who pulled that off is no longer the coach. So that tells you that's definitely not the mark of a strong, burgeoning program, which is what I think UCF fans hope they have again under Scott Frost. Great conversation, Andrew. One we will continue as we head through Big 12 Media Days and into fall camp. I want to thank you for joining me, guys. That's it for another great edition of Locked On UCF. Thank you for making us your first listen. For your next listen, go check out our friends at Locked On the Portal or the Portal Show. Brian Smith has the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. Be the most informed college football fan with all the ongoings with the Portal. You can find them on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And you can find us here tomorrow on Locked On UCF.